Welcome back to the Shepherd's Study. This is a podcast of the Shepherd's Theological Seminary, and I'm your host, Tim Miller. I'm here with a local pastor, Josh Wredberg, who has the quality of being the very first MDiv graduate of Shepherd's Theological Seminary. And from there, he went on to plant a church, which is Redeemer Community Church in Fuquay-Varina. And so I've asked him to come on to talk to us about church planting. And so I'm so grateful that the Lord led you to accept that.
That is a great question.
He got you.
Too many times as us as academics, we're like on one side and pastoral ministers on the other side.
Jesus is the ultimate true Israelite who can save and restore the nation and bless the world.
I hope that everything I am shows the world my love for Christ.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. It seems like a lifetime ago that I was a student here.
Yeah.
But we look back fondly on some of those memories.
Yeah, well, I'm often in the STS hallway, and we've got the pictures of all the graduates, and there you are, rather lonely in those early years.
I get that picture sent to me once in a while from someone who's there. They send it, and I know exactly where they are, and they always usually make some snide remark along with it.
Yeah. Well, it was fun. We had lunch prior to coming and sitting in these chairs and talking, and the Lord's led us along rather similar paths.
Yes, a lot of the same stops.
Yeah. And so it's great to see what God's doing through your life. So give our audience a bit of a background. What led you to church planting?
Well, I was a bit of an accidental church planter. I never thought I would do it. It wasn't something that I had a real desire or passion for. I was finishing up my MDiv here at Shepherd's. I was on staff at the church, and we had moved to a different suburb 2 years earlier for the really deep theological reason of we could afford a house there, and that was why. It was about, at that point, about 20, 25 minutes away. With traffic now, it's 30 or 35 minutes
extending, yes.
away. But we were living there. I was teaching a class at the church. I was praying about what's next, just felt led to a lead pastor role. Do I put my name in somewhere? I wasn't sure what to do. And in teaching this class, this adult class at the church, I realized there were so many other couples that lived in the same community I did. We would all get up on a Sunday morning. We would drive
25 minutes.
Yeah, 25 minutes, 2 more suburbs over to go to church here. And they would all get in our cars after church, drive back. Some of us might get together once in a while during the week. But, we were trying to be involved in this church community that was this far away and leaving our community to do it. And it was really, I don't remember the exact moment. I don't remember, there wasn't a spot, but in some time in there, it started just bouncing around my skull. Like, should we plant a church with these people in our community? We talked to a few other leaders that were living there as well, that were interested. And then I went to the leadership at the church and said, would you consider supporting a church plant in Fuquay-Varina, which sounds like a foreign country, but it's just a different suburb of Raleigh. And the leadership was supportive and allowed us to advertise it at the church and do some interest meetings, begin a Bible study, really supportive as we got ready to launch. And I think that was in January, and that August, we launched our Sunday services.
All right, so that's a pretty quick pace to get there.
It was. We had sort of a unique situation because coming out at the time it was Colonial Baptist, but Shepherd's Church is very large, and so there was a pretty good group that was ready to go. And so I think there was some uniqueness there. And we've been at church together for a few years. It wasn't like I'd just come in. So yeah, it was unusual in that sense, but it allowed us to start quickly. We didn't know what we were doing. It didn't seem unusual. Had never done it before, hadn't thought about it, hadn't studied church planting, just trying to figure it out as we went.
Yeah, so give me a little bit more of a sense of that. So here you are. You'd have been 28,
I think.
Okay, was there any inside trepidation as you sat there and thought, I mean, this is territory in which a number of people have trod before me and failed?
Well, there might have been enough arrogance that I didn't have. I should probably had more trepidation. So there's youthful exuberance. We'll call it that.
That's helpful.
Is that
It's
better?
helpful,
Exuberance?
yeah.
There were people already connected that we were confident in. We had some really strong relationships. Even from that class I was teaching, we still have a number, I think 6 families that are part of our church 18 years later were
That's
part of
great.
the initial group, that have stayed there and, you know, haven't moved away over the years. And they were on board quickly. I don't know if maybe I wasn't smart enough to be scared.
Yeah.
I hadn't, like you said, people tried it before. I hadn't really thought about church planning. It
Mm.
wasn't on my radar, so I hadn't read horror stories, or it just seemed like a pretty great opportunity.
And Fuquay was blowing up in
Not
terms
yet.
of. Oh, is that
It
right?
wasn't
This
yet.
was previous to that.
Yeah, it was before it was blown up, but it was still, it needed, like, there was opportunities for healthy churches there. I had neighbors that I was trying to share the gospel with, and I wasn't sure where I would send them. And some of
Yeah.
that was my ignorance of the area, but some is the need for healthier churches. So I don't think I had enough experience to know that I should have probably been more nervous. And so that combined with a good group, it felt like it was the right thing to do. And we instantly had buy-in from a number of people, and I think that was the Lord's kindness. So by the time we started, Colonial had allowed us to encourage people to give through them, and they would hold it for us. So even by the time we started 8 months later, we had money in the bank. I had transitioned to a part-time role here so that it even gave a little cushion for me to, you know, be pastoring, but I think my insurance and stuff was paid for. So even some of that financial stuff that would really make a person worry, it didn't seem quite as heavy because we had some money set aside. I had some opportunity to make a little bit. And actually, I transitioned away from that a lot quicker than we even expected, because when we started, we had just a really committed core group who started giving right away. And
Yeah.
we were able to do that.
How many was that original core group? Do you recall?
I don't remember the exact number. I know when we started in August, we covenanted in the end of either October or the beginning of November, and we had 43 adults that actually covenanted as members 2.5 months in. So 43 adults, we joke that we averaged 3 kids family. So it's probably 85 to 100 of us that actually were members. And you had other people that had started attending that didn't covenant with us yet. So, you know, we probably had an actual group of 120 within those first couple months. So big enough where you feel like something's happening here. We're not tenuous.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it was probably something around that.
Yeah. So when you plant out of a church and you're still in the broad region of that church,
Yeah.
which is a little different, right? So sometimes people say, you know, Detroit needs a church, so we'll send you off there, and that becomes a little easier. How do you handle and deal with individuals who come to you who are coming from that home church and that sort of thing? How does a church planter deal with that?
What's funny, that still happens 18 years later.
Yeah.
You know, someone lives in Fuquay and they've made this, or near it, and they've made this drive, and it's gotten
Right.
longer and longer and longer. And maybe their kids are in the youth group, their kids are out of the house now, and they've started to say, oh, it'd be great to go to church in our community. And
Yeah.
they come over and say, hey, we've been there. There's been an open-handedness, so it hasn't been awkward at all.
Yeah.
We have never had that we know of anyone who has said, like, oh, you can't go there. We were
Yeah.
brought up on stage a few weeks before we planted and prayed for, and there was a group on stage that was there and was prayed over and sent. So maybe the question we better ask for anyone here. Now, it helps that Colonial, I think, was 4,000 people. So, you know, our 43 members
Yeah, that's right.
wasn't life-shattering for
Yeah.
the church. But we have never heard or felt that there was this resistance to people coming
Yeah.
and being a part of our church. And so it just was never an issue. I think
Yeah.
even it was like the first year, the Sunday after Christmas, Stephen Davey said, let's swap pulpits. And he's like, the reason is your first holidays as a church planter, they're not fun services because no one comes. He's like, so let me come, I'll preach it, and
Yeah.
you come and you can preach here. So we did that the first year. And so there was a kindness in that we never felt that we were like the thought that we were stealing people or anything
Right.
like that. People were encouraged to go. They were, they were maybe not challenged. Maybe that's too strong, but
Sure.
certainly
Presented with an
yeah,
opportunity.
and not this
yeah.
is a bad thing. These folks spoke positively about us.
Yeah,
to
I mean, it
people,
sounds
so.
healthy. So tell me then about after you guys were planted. I know you've been involved in church planting. And so you said it's been 18 years. How many church plants have you guys been involved in planting?
So we've planted 4 out of
Okay.
our church, and then there's 3 others that didn't come out of our church, but we've been heavily involved with in sending finances or sending people or both. So 7 that we've been very involved with, 4 directly from our church. And we got into that. The first one was actually 2 years after we started. It was
That's a pretty short timetable.
It is, and it was one of those unique circumstances, sort of like our planting, that if you desire, and this is what I encourage you guys as you're thinking about planting, if you desire to be part of it and like really desire it and keep your eyes open, God often gives you opportunities that you can just step into. We had just brought a second person on staff, and there was this group in Wisconsin near Madison, a healthy group of people that had to come out of another church. And it wasn't church split. It was just clearly there was differences of how to do church. And instead of staying and creating problems, they said, we should step out because differences of opinion, and we don't want to cause problems.
Sure.
I think it was done as healthy as could be in a situation like that. But now they're here and they're like, we want to start a church. They knew of us from connections. They said, we'd love to do something like what you're doing, but we don't know where to start. And the person we just brought on staff had some strong connections there, and through conversation said, I'd be willing to go up there and lead them doing it. And so we just hired him, our second, and then we paid for about 1.5 years his salary to go up there and work with them, which was hard because you go from like, hey, we
can do more now.
Now it's like, hey, we can pay for a staff member in another church. But I think the benefit of it is it's really ingrained in who we are, that we'll send people to other churches, we'll pay, we'll try to do everything we can to help churches start. And so it was unorthodox, but it was a little bit, Eugene Peterson sometimes talks about pastoral ministry as not trying to like create movements that God works in as much as try to being aware to where God is moving and then stepping into it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of our church planting has been more that. Over the years, as we've done more of it, we've also planned, and tried to be more strategic.
Sure.
But a lot of it has been, God, you seem to be doing something here.
Yeah.
We'll jump on board. And that's how we've planted first. Our second one was with a Shepherd's grad who was a member of our church. And he had finished his MDiv, was still serving the church, was trying to figure out what to do next. And we had a group of people that were coming from a community about 40 minutes from us. There was 3 families. And they were interested in starting a church in their community. And he had some interest, had some friendships there, so he started meeting with them. We started one of our small groups with that.
Sure.
A couple other families joined. They all ended up moving to that community and planting a church there. And so that was a little more traditional in the sense of it was more time, more preparation. And it was one of those things where because we had planted, as a church plant, and then we had helped with the church plant, like he was like, okay, so what should I do now? And I just remember thinking, I don't remember. This was set, I don't know how many, 8 years earlier.
Yeah.
So much has happened. I can look at my files, but I don't remember. And he's asked all these questions. When do I do this? When do I do that? And that's when we started looking around and saying, like, there are some good church planting networks that are helping churches do this regularly. And we started looking at some of them and saying, is there one we want to be a part of that seems like-minded that can just help us with a lot of these logistics?
And somebody who's walked through this with multiple people before.
They're doing it all the time. And so we got involved with one called the Pillar Network. And that's been really helpful for us because it's still, like, you still plant as a church. They're not taking it over. They're not planting. But I remember we had a meeting with them. We probably met with them to learn about it. Then we met with them a second time, really thinking about it. And in that meeting, our church planner, Kevin, we were talking with them, and he said, let me connect you as soon as we leave on text with 3 different guys. One planted 2 months ago. One's just planting now. One's going to plant in 6 months. And I want to connect you with each. And that way, so Kevin could ask them, hey, when did you do this? And this is fresh for them. Well, we did it this. Another one's like, well, I'm about to take this step. And so instead of me trying to rack my brain going like,
what I did 8 years ago,
and ours was
in
unusual.
a different experience and situation.
Yeah, this was a lot more. And so that we've stayed involved in that church planting network, and it's been helpful. Like-minded guys, other churches that want to be supportive. We've supported some of these other church plants through it. So that's been really helpful to us to find a like-minded group that plants together.
Is Dwayne Milione, is he?
Dwayne Milione
okay.
is the one who started it out of Open Door in Raleigh
Yeah.
12 years ago or something.
Yeah, we just had him in to do a D-Men sort of class for us. So
Yeah.
good guy.
No, that's where it all started.
All right, so there's a book out there. Maybe you've read it. Church Planting is for Wimps.
Yep.
Do you agree?
It's a provocative title, and I think pretty quickly
it was a great title. I got to be honest.
No, it's great. Pretty quickly he says, he backs off it.
Right, he does.
I agree with some of the points he's making, and I think knowing Mike, he would say, I was intentionally provocative.
But I wanted to sell some books.
Yeah.
I mean,
and we're talking about it. It's like a 15-year-old book.
Yeah, that's right.
But right, his point is that church revitalization is necessary. Don't overlook it.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it's harder. And I agree with that.
Yeah.
If a church is planted well, I think there are a lot of difficulties that you get to avoid that church revitalization brings. No one can look at me and say, "Hey, we used to do it this way."
Yeah.
Before you were here. I'm like, well,
I was here day one.
Yeah. Right. So there's just some of those things. Somebody asked us recently, could you tell us what some of your sacred cows are? I was like, it's possible we have some. But I don't know what they are. The nice thing about being a church plant, and until a couple years ago or a year and a half ago, we'd rented space till we finally were able to move into our own building a year and a half ago. Like, you're really flexible. If you're like, hey, next week this is happening, we got to do this instead. Everyone's like, okay. Yeah. I mean, we set up every week. It's not that different. So there's a sense of flexibility, a sense of enthusiasm, a sense of like, we can adjust. Like, people are like, hey, you're bought into it. That you go to a church revitalization. My wife and I did that for a period of time, and it was really hard for her to. She was realizing that Josh could be preaching to some people sitting out there who really don't like him. And the reality is, in a church plant, if they really don't like me, they're probably not staying.
Yeah, they wouldn't have come in the first place, and they would have gone back to wherever they were. Yeah,
most likely, if you're like, I really don't like the guy who preaches most weeks, you're probably not going to stay. But if you've been there 40 years, and
this
the
is
guy
my
comes
church,
in,
not his. Yeah,
it's like, I'm not leaving because of you. I just dislike you, and I let people know. So like, you have that. We got to write, or actually, you don't write a constitution. You steal
that's right,
parts from constitutions.
Yep.
But you put it together. You get to implement it. It doesn't have anything weird in it.
Yeah.
Other guys, they get these constitutions handed to them, and you're like, the church I pastored that revitalized, the phrase "the senior pastor" in all caps was in that constantly, all caps.
Oh boy.
The senior pastor, which it made some changes easier, because I'd be like, well, I'm the senior pastor, and it basically says I'm in charge
Just
of
look
everything.
what it says I can do.
Pretty much everything. So if you're going to revitalize, at least revitalize a church that gives you all the power.
There you go.
But like, you have to deal with all that. And so in that sense, I think church planting there is an easier part to it. But no pastoral ministry is easy.
Yeah.
And church planting, it's not easy, but it does avoid some of those unique challenges of church revitalization.
Yeah. No, I've been a part of a couple of revitalizations, and you're exactly right. You've got to work through this old document, and you wonder how this thing was ever put together. Yeah. They must have stolen it from other people, but who knows where they got some of this language, and then you've got to sell it to a crowd to whom, they might have been there when that language was put in there, and they've got some historic connection that you don't know. I mean, there's a lot that goes on there.
Every weird thing in there is the direct result of something that happened.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't know what that thing that happened. Or you learn about it and you're like, but that doesn't matter anymore, but it still matters to somebody.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff you don't deal with in church planting. It's, you just get to, here's the vision. It's the first vision we've had as a church. It's not the 10th iteration of a vision, a different direction from a new guy. That you just don't deal with any of that. So it's unity, at least initially, is much easier in a church planting than a church revitalization.
Yeah. So coming back to that concept, church planting is for whims. There's some humor there, but actually, church planting has some of its unique challenges too. So help us think through what are some of those things that you think, maybe even some things that you think I wouldn't have expected this to be a challenge. Or perhaps you thought of all those. I don't know.
I certainly didn't think of all of them. I mean, some of the most obvious ones are there's financial challenges. You don't have often a base. Like a church revitalization, you might be financially okay. There's these people who've been given to this for a lot of years. So you've got to do that. There's usually fundraising that has to be done. Most guys don't love fundraising, don't know how to do it. That's where networks and things like that can help, because they a lot of times give training in this, make connections. But that's real, and you're asking questions a lot of times. I was just on a call this morning with a couple of our church planners. One of them now is a couple years in, the church is doing well, but they're thinking about bringing a guy part-time on, and he's wrestling with, like, I have this much money in the bank and this much, we got this much giving. Is it the right time? How do I lead the church to do it? And just wrestling through all of that, like, unknown.
Yeah.
See, that space, that's a hard one. Like, what space do you use?
Well, I think you just told us you spent the first 16 years in a space that wasn't your own, right?
We rented, and we were fortunate we had a weird situation where we started in the public high school. We were told we could have it for a year, but they only would sign a contract for the calendar year, which was 5 months. 1 month before we were supposed to renew, they're like, we're having janitorial trouble. We can't do it.
Oh.
So now we got 120 people. But we
can't fit in the house.
Yeah, where do we go? We were too big to make the most places work. We got bad information about the middle school. No one's meeting there. We'd go there and they're like, oh, there's a church meeting here. Like, oh, great. And they're like, well, it's a really big, you could enter in the cafeteria on the other side, and like, you guys would really never cross paths. I mean, we're like, sure, let's try it. We got nothing else.
Yeah.
And we were there, and about a year and a half in, when we were outgrowing the cafeteria, they called us and said, that other church is leaving. Do you want the auditorium? Which at that point was one of the nicer places in town. Had theater seating. We no longer had to pull a trailer. A lot of good, and it was nice
enough. Setting up chairs. Oh, I've done that.
Yeah, we were done with that.
Yeah.
It was nice enough that it was a good spot for us.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we took a long time to build was we had a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
But it's still not yours permanently.
Yeah. And you never know next year. Yeah. What are they going to do? Yeah,
well, and we got the call in March of 2020 saying you can't meet there anymore, which I know COVID affect everyone, but it affects you different if it's your building.
Yeah.
Because you're now making the decision.
Yep.
We're not making the decision, and we don't know when we're back in there. And so we have to, a few weeks in, when people are like, well, maybe we can start meeting like this, we're like, well, we can't meet there. What do we do? So that's a huge one. You have finances, you have space, you have a lot of times you'd like, if your ecclesiology is such, which I would encourage, that you have elders. Like, you have to develop those elders, and there might be a period of time where it's just one, could be multiple. So at church revitalization, maybe you're changing ecclesiology, but depending on that thing, maybe you have staff that works as elders. But here, like, you're trying to raise up elders, maybe for the first time, and you're trying to do it maybe by yourself because you're the only elder. Sometimes there's a couple that start together, so that becomes a challenge. Everything's a first, which is really exciting. But everything's a first.
Yeah.
So you have to walk. It's the first time you've walked through everything. So there's no binding precedent, which can be freeing. There's also no precedent. So you're going, what do we do now?
Yeah.
Your first church discipline case, your first hire, your first building project, your first all of these things. Hey, we have enough students now. We need to start a youth ministry. First youth ministry, like all those first, that wears on you.
Well, and all of those things have a number of questions of philosophy, and you've got to think, you hadn't thought through this one yet, but now all of a sudden, what are we going to do with the youth group? How do we do that?
And wherever you're bound by precedent in church revitalization to some extent, you've got to wrestle with it. When you don't have any, but then all of a sudden you've got to go like, well, I had an idea for this when I was in seminary. But now you're looking at faces and people, and you're like, was that really what I think we should do? Or is that I'm writing a paper in seminary and it's ideal? And I've been asked all the questions that affect people's lives. And you've got to go through that. And how do I lead people to that? Should I be even leading them to this? Should I, like, all of that stuff, which is why I encourage guys to think about if they can lead their churches to thinking about sabbaticals. A lot of church planners, there's no statistics for this, but most statistics are made up anyway, so it doesn't matter. But a lot of guys leave, I think, after about 5 years because they're so worn out.
Mm.
And a new ministry, there's an energizing aspect to
Yeah.
it. And even though they're exhausted, it energizes them so they can go 3 or 4 more years, maybe on fumes.
Sure.
But it looks like, okay, maybe I can go there. And I think something like a sabbatical, though it's hard, it's always hard to institute that. And what do you do during that time? Could be life-saving for guys, because the weight of having to start everything from scratch for 5 years is heavy. And you often don't realize how heavy it is until you've stepped away from it.
So tell us a little bit about how your church has instituted something like a sabbatical.
Now, we waited way too long too.
Okay.
But we realized that. And so now for our pastoral staff members, I think it's every 6 years, you can apply for a 3-month sabbatical, including funding for it.
That's
and
great.
basically, when I say apply for it, the elders approve it, but
Right.
it's policy.
Yep.
So you can do that, and we try to do funding for it because we want you to go do special things with your family. And if we say, hey, you have 3 months off, but no extra money, so we give funds to it that you can use to do special things. So when I took one, we were never like the big amusement park, because when we took a vacation, usually it was cheaper than that. And also, it's the one chance you get to go see people, all that.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah.
they were like, we gotta do Disney. Like, I'm like, we're not really a Disney fan. All this. Took a sabbatical. They gave us this money. And so I sat them down and said, do you want to do Disney or do you want to do Universal Studios with Harry Potter World? And they all said Harry Potter World. And we went and stayed at the resort for 4 days and did all the rides.
That's great.
And I got to tell them the church gave us this
Yeah,
to us.
What a gift.
And it was one of those things. They didn't just give me the time off, they actually gave me the money that allowed us to do this. So we've tried to institute it for our staff that way. We've always had it in our constitution that any lay elders, after 6 years of serving, take a mandatory year of not serving as an elder.
Sure.
And that's, we can't give them 3 months off work,
Right.
but we can give them that. And no emails about it, no public speak, like you have to rest. And it was funny at first, the first couple times, lay elders were like, I don't know if I need it. I don't know how I feel about
Right.
this. Like 2 months in, they come and they're like, this is so life-giving. Right? Just the weight of knowing everyone's problems
Yeah.
that they got to step out of. And it's good for the soul. It's humbling. They're making decisions without me.
Mm.
And the church
Yes.
is okay.
Yeah.
Other people stepping up and doing things. So we found it to be a good practice. We should have instituted it sooner. But everyone wrestles with it. And this is, you said, the challenge of church planning.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, this sounds great. I don't actually know if the church can, if I don't do this,
Yeah.
can the church make it? Which is in itself probably indicative of a problem.
Yeah.
But it's a real problem that
Mhm.
you feel it. And so that's one of those things that you just carry so many things that you don't even realize. And like people come to you and like they expect you to know everything and you expect yourself to know everything.
Mm.
And one of the things I've learned over the years, and it's helped as our staff has grown and everything, but I love to answer people with saying, I don't know. Like, hey, like I saw this. What do I do? I don't know, but I can tell you who you should talk to about that.
Yeah.
I love answering. In fact, I was in a meeting with 2 of our pastors yesterday, and they mentioned something like, I don't know what that is. And they started to apologize. They're like, oh, I think we talked about it. You were gone for a couple days last week, and I think we talked about it. Sorry. And I'm like, don't apologize to me. I'm very happy I don't know what this is, but I'm curious about it.
Right.
And they explained to me, I'm like, oh, that sounds so cool. I'm glad we're doing that.
Mm.
That's hard at
Sure.
at first, and you have to be intentional to walk away from that.
Mm.
How do I get people in place? How can I back off? And how am I willing to say this thing may suffer for at some point while someone comes up to speed, while they adopt it as their own, but it's okay for the long-term good of the church, for
Yeah.
this person,
It'll be healthier in the long
for
term.
me.
Yep.
But it's really hard to do. It's your baby.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, one of those unique things. It really does feel like one of your children in a way that a church revitalization, it does, but maybe not quite the same way.
Yeah, that's helpful. So thinking about the 2 directionalities, you've got a guy graduating and he's hearing somebody say, hey, plant some churches. Somebody else, however, says, that's crazy. We don't need more churches. Look at all these churches that are dying out here. We've got, in this Raleigh area, you've got numbers of churches that are just dwindling, dying off. It would be foolish to try and start something new. What would you say to somebody who said church planting shouldn't be happening in a time period in which our churches are dying?
I feel like we're setting two things in opposition that don't need to be in opposition. I'd say do them both. Why were these in competition? Ideally, if you had healthy churches, they wouldn't be dying, right? So like there's some going on there, and maybe some churches have to die because people are holding on to unhealthy things, unhealthy patterns. I would love it if churches that were dying would actually look to someone and bring in someone and say, hey, we'll follow you to health. But that's rare.
Yeah.
Or a church turning to another church or a church plant saying, hey, we're dying, you're growing. How about you come in and all this investment, it becomes a new chapter in the life of the church by doing this. But that doesn't happen. You might know this. I think people would be shocked at how many conversations have happened between a growing church plant and a dying church. And then when it actually comes down to it, nothing comes of it because the dying church won't give up.
Yes.
And even there's like 8 people left.
Yep.
They got $1 million worth of building and it's dying, but they're afraid of losing something, even though it's lost.
Yeah,
and you
it's
have
already
this
gone.
church plant of 120 people that's growing, and instead of
bursting at its seams.
And they're not saying, hey, we want to take you over and kick you out. They're saying, we would love to build upon this foundation that's been laid, but people won't let it. So I think they don't need to be in opposition.
Yeah.
I would say to anyone like that, be part of a healthy church, and with the leadership of that healthy church, identify where does God seem to be moving, where seem to be both a combination of opportunities and needs.
Yeah.
If you can find a church that will be revitalized, and there's a church that will help you do that, I would not attempt either of those things on your own. That's the first thing to tell them. You're foolish if you attempt it on your own.
Yeah.
Like you're putting yourself in a bad spot. So do it as part of a healthy church sending you, and then just identify with them. We've done both. We are currently working with our current church planting resident. He's moving to Nashville, and there's a 150-year-old church that is dying, and they voted to give their property to the Nashville Baptist Association. Yeah. The Nashville Baptist Association wants it to be replanted, which is sort of a halfway between. So it's that perfect middle ground.
Yeah.
If you don't want to make a decision, replant a church.
Yep.
But the church needs to die in the sense that there's just not enough left. And the people are recognizing it wonderfully. They're voting to give it to them. This Nashville Baptist Association is bringing our guy Michael in, and he's going to rally support just like a regular church plant. Yep. Even probably join a church up there for a period of time to be sent both by us and by that local church.
Yes.
Go in there. He's met with the members of this dying church, and a lot of them have already met him. He was up there this past weekend for their 150th anniversary. They know he's coming. Many of them talked about being involved when they're ready to relaunch the church. He's probably going to keep it the same name and sort of relaunch a whole new chapter. But it's making use of the resources, the buildings, but it's going to start in a much healthier way than it was. Yeah. So we think that's great. And to me, it's like, that's the opportunity. We didn't say, this is what we're going to do. Through connections, these came up, and it was like, this seems like, let's explore this. Wow, the Lord seems to be working and moving. Let's do it. Let's get behind it.
Yeah, this is the best way to use the resources that godly people have already brought together in this scenario. Yeah. But you're right. Back when I was in Michigan, I was doing a year interim pastoring while they were looking for a pastor. But the church was in a unique situation. There was a whole reason for it, but they didn't have their own building. They didn't have a pastor, but they had about 100 people. And so they're looking for both of these things at the same time. And I remember one of the elders knew one of the other local churches in the area that had about 8 people in it. They had a building. It would have fit exactly what we needed. And he talked to that pastor numerous times, and that guy just would not change what he was doing. And I remember this elder at this church that I was helping just saying, I think one day he'll stand before the Lord for standing in the way of what God's doing. Yeah. And I thought, man, that's really hard. Yeah. But on the other point you were making, some of those churches, they don't want to change. They maybe want the young guy to come in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'd love to have the young pastor who's going to bring in all the young people in our church, but we're not going to change anything.
We're
And
doing the
it's,
exact same things.
Yeah. Well, how did you get here? Doing what you're doing. So if we're not going to change what we're doing, then we're probably not going to get anywhere. And that's a really hard conversation to have with some people who really just don't want to move the needle.
They're so convinced that the next guy, and they'd be
Mhm.
like, wait, what about the last 4 guys?
Yeah.
And every time, well, there's some problem with them. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. But if that's the case, then there's a problem with you picking bad guys.
That maybe.
So let's not do that again.
Right.
So, but it is. I mean, I understand it from a human perspective, but it's so self-defeating and it's sad.
Yeah.
And they want to hold on to something and they end up losing everything versus saying, what if people could build on this legacy?
Absolutely.
So it's 50 years, 100 years from now, there's a healthy, thriving church here. Might look a little bit different, but that builds upon the legacy versus decline and what eventually it's foreclosed on. What happens?
Yeah. I loved it when we were in Philadelphia. We were doing a church revitalization. We were in a building that was collapsing. I mean, it was in Philly, so it was worth a lot, but the building was falling apart. We couldn't afford to keep it, and ended up selling that building, having a little bit of, having a good amount of money, but still nothing to buy. And we were just thinking, what are we going to do? And this little Episcopalian church that really did have the core of the gospel in it, they were finally closing. And they said, we want a gospel preaching church to come.
That's awesome.
And so they sold us the $8 million building for, I think it was $500,000, something like that.
That's
Just to get
fantastic.
out from whatever debt they had. And then those resources were then able to be used by God's people. It was just a picture of God's grace and kindness. And I just thought of the saints previously who had provided for this. It's going to keep going, and it's exciting.
Yeah, we put in our constitution that if we were ever to disband, all of our assets as a church had to be given to another local church for that exact reason. This was all invested for the kingdom, and it needs to be part of it. It doesn't need to. And what's that look like? It means local churches, not sold off and given to a nonprofit, not whatever. Like give it to a local church.
Yeah. That needs to still be doing this sort of thing in this area.
That's why we invested in it.
Yeah.
It wasn't to make a name for ourselves. So if the church name changes, that doesn't matter. But these resources were gospel investments for a local church. They need to stay with local churches.
All right. So we're in the South. We're in what some might call the Bible Belt-ish area. And what about Raleigh area? Do we need more churches? I mean, is there a need for church planting here now in this region? If a seminary student came to me and said, I'm thinking about planting a church, should I stay in this area? Should I say, no, you need to go somewhere else? Or is there a need here? What would you say as a pastor?
I would say we are falling behind in the amount of people that are worshiping Jesus, the percentage of people in Raleigh and the environment. Every year we're further behind on the percentage of people. That the current churches could not grow fast enough. And I know in our community, we've grown a lot. Our church has, but not as fast as our community.
Yeah.
Our community is booming. They're building thousands of neighborhoods, thousands of homes in dozens and dozens of neighborhoods. So we look out there and we might say like, hey, last year we grew by 150 people. I mean,
it's a drop in the
6,000
bucket.
people moved to our town now? So
what about the rest of them?
Yeah, what about the other almost 6,000 people that aren't going to our church? So I think there's a desperate need for it. I think there's great opportunity. And here's the thing, as a church, you can't build fast enough. If you're growing, you can't build fast enough to do it. You probably can't even church plant fast enough. So I don't think it's an either or strategy. It's a both and. Like we're looking at, even though we just moved in, we've got to add some additional classrooms and stuff like that because we're more visible now and so many people are moving to our community. So they're looking for churches. Some of them, as we've had some visit that aren't Christians, but they're looking for something. Visit that are like maybe immature Christians, some that are just relocating to the area and they found us on a healthy church website. So they want to come, all mix of people that are coming. So how do we minister to the people we have, but we're still losing ground. And so, churches need to be planted. And what better place to plant churches than when there are healthy churches there that can plant those churches?
Yeah.
So I would say absolutely. But again, talk to the church you're at if it's healthy and work with them in identifying the need and the opportunities for planting. But we need more churches. We're just falling behind.
Yeah.
Each year we're further behind.
Yeah.
There are fewer people worshiping Jesus percentage-wise in our town than there was 10 years ago.
Well, this is a podcast of Shepherd's Theological Seminary. We've got some seminary students who are perhaps thinking about their future. And some of them may be considering church planting as a future goal as they're going through seminary. Imagine you're talking to one of them, and maybe they're just a couple of years into seminary, and they're saying, I don't know if the Lord wants me to go into church planting, but maybe. What advice would you give them? What would you say?
Well, be a part of a church that you would want to replicate. It doesn't mean every single thing about it, but you're like, this is a healthy church. Because if you've never been part of a healthy church and you're going to go, whether it's pastor an established church or plant a church, but you don't actually know what it's like to be part of a healthy church, because you can envision it, but it's not the same as being part of it.
Right.
There's a dynamic of life where people are caring for each other and encouraging each other that you can't quite imagine until you experience. So be a part of a healthy church. Get really involved serving there, get to know the leadership and talk with them about it, and let God use those conversations and those experiences to shape where you go next. But no matter where you minister, it'll be good for your family to be part of a healthy church, and it'll be good for your future ministry to be part of a healthy church.
Yeah.
Because we send guys out and we don't say, hey, you have to look like us. Obviously, there are going to be a number of things that if they're going to plant out of us and they're even going to come to us, there's probably already agreement on. Like, we believe strongly the Bible teaches a plurality of elders. So like guys who come understand that they're going to plant with that. And hopefully if they weren't even fully convinced, they would be by the time they've experienced it. So it's not be that, but it doesn't have to look just like us. But we think one of the greatest contributions we make to them is saturation in a church that we believe is really healthy, where people care for each other, where people really do meet each other's needs, where Bible teaching is infused into the lifeblood of the church, where all these things are the case. We think your time there strengthens you for the time to go out. And so you're not just getting it from reading books, you're getting it from experience. And then we can help you as you think through the future. Not to say like, hey, we have never said to someone, you need to go there. So they come, they're talking to us, they're wrestling with things. One of the churches we planted, when they came to us, he was at Southeastern Seminary. Sorry about that.
We like Southeastern. So.
But he was actually at Dwayne Milioni's church. But because of some family connections, was moving to Fuquay and said to me, like, we've been in the process of planting. I'd love to come to your church. I asked Dwayne. Dwayne's like, he's our sharpest guy. I'm like, okay, yes.
Yes.
So he came to us. They thought they were planting in Portland, Oregon. Just had this burden for it and talked about it for years. Because of COVID, their hearts moved towards the Charlotte area where they were from. A lot of family members there that weren't really involved in church, disconnected from church. Yeah. And through that, they came to us almost apologetic. We just had a lot of time to talk and think, because all of a sudden, the life was shut down. And both of us just on our own started saying, would we ever consider going there? And he was really apologetic. Like, I've always only talked to you about Portland. We're like, we didn't pick Portland and say, we're planting a church there. Like, this was a burden. We'll certainly support if that seems wise what you're saying. Yeah. So they're there, planted a church a couple of years. Church is doing well, but they're where they need to be. But that was in partnership. Be part of a healthy church, have conversations, let them know their character, and then, work with them to see where needs and opportunities arise.
What I love what you're saying there is, if you want to plant a healthy church, you've got to have the example of a healthy church, but you've got to submit yourself to a healthy church. Because at the end of the day, if somebody comes to you who's, been sporadic in attendance, or maybe they're there, but they've never helped with anything, and they say to you, hey, Pastor, I think I'm going to go plant a church. You're going to say to them, we're not going to support that. I mean, we can begin working with you so that maybe that's a future for you, but you're not right now qualified, right?
Yeah.
And the church has to be the one who's giving the thumbs up, in essence, through the Spirit, who's leading the church to do that.
But you want to find the type of guy who has a desire and a longing and a burden for somewhere. So it's, again, not something you say, I pick you, I pick the place, I pick that, now go and do it. I would maybe some guys do that and it works. I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones who have to live there. They're the ones who have to serve there. They're the ones who have to be burdened about that place and be praying for that place. So now, but I wouldn't mind. I'd like to talk to you about it and understand and help you as you think through it and help shape that and what it might look like and what the needs are and things like that. So we want to do this together. Allow us to help you. And if we're going to pour in and support and send, that should be a part of it.
Yeah.
But you better be burdened for there. You better desire. You better do that. Otherwise, like, it's probably not going to go well.
Yeah, you've got to have a passion for it. You've got, I think sometimes if some seminary students, I'm every once in a while I'll run into one who tells me he's got a passion for missions or something, and yet he's not involved in the local church, and I've never seen him share the gospel with anyone, or there's no evidence of that, and I always push back and I say, okay, but what are you doing now?
Yeah.
Because if you're not doing it now, then let's say you make it to the mission field. I mean, maybe you'll start doing it then, but probably not.
Yeah. Why would you think so? Yeah.
So
we had an interesting story just recently. A family came to us from off the mission field, and it was Middle Eastern, very difficult, very oppressive, had a lot of healing to do. So came and started attending, became members. And certainly, it'll give them a lot of space to heal. It was hard.
Yeah.
She started getting involved. He still attended things, but not that involved. And talked about going back overseas. And, we sort of allow that process to play out. And it didn't end up working out. And he still sort of struggled with it. And recently, we're working with Matt Capps, who was on the podcast. They're planting, and we're working to support and send families to that church plant because it's in another suburb right near us. And this guy came to me and he said, I'm thinking about going and being part of that church plant. And he said this, he said, I realized I'd been so focused about going overseas, I wasn't serving like I should have in the church. And I think maybe this is an opportunity to fully, he's like, even if God would send us, I need to re-engage here. I think I've been thinking so much about that.
Yeah.
I haven't been doing here. And so I said, this church plant could be a great way to do that. Like so go and meet with the church planner, talk to him, tell him your background. You can offer to help, but basically say to him, but anything you need, I'll do. I saw that church planner a week later. He's like, I met with this member. And I'm like, well, how'd it go? And everything I'd encouraged to say, he went and said. And he's been doing it. Like, what do you need?
Amen.
I'll help.
Yeah.
But it was sort of that same thing. Like, but it was great because the Lord helped him realize that.
Yeah.
Like, I can be so focused about that out there that I'm not here.
Yeah.
And now I'm more optimistic about maybe someday they would go.
Yeah,
again,
exactly.
Because you're seeing this work where he's fully involved. And that's one of the beauties of church planting is there is all hands on deck type mentality. And sometimes an established church, like there's always needs because there's people, and there's sinners. There's always needs. But sometimes the needs are more glaring in a church plant. And that can be really good for people. People who've maybe not they've been faithful, they've served, but there's a level of ownership they might take in a church plant. And so I think God can really use that in some maturing members who need that to be able to go and say, so this church plant that's starting in August, we have 5 of our families from our church that have signed up, like they're going to be core team members, faithful people who are serving. But I can see in each one of them this sort of like, hey, maybe I can do a little more there. Like there's a bigger, it feels like there's a bigger need there, and I want to be part of doing it, which is a really cool thing that God does.
So let me ask you perhaps a more personal question, because you've been in the church for 18 years now. Some church planters feel like they're called to plant churches. And, they're there for 4 years, 5 years, they find somebody else to move on. Mm-hmm. And they move on, they plant another church. And I think earlier you said sometimes maybe somebody's doing that because they just need the energy of a new church plant. And maybe they're escaping the problems of their church plant that they planted. But how do you know that you're supposed to stay versus supposed to go and plant another church? Maybe somebody's listening right now and they said, this has been exciting for the last 5 years. We finally got a building. We got all this. But maybe it's time to move on. Maybe.
Yeah. I would suggest the default should generally be stay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the issue most of the time is guys staying too long. It's probably guys leaving too early. So make it your default to stay. How do you know? I mean, I don't know. There's a specific answer to that. I would just say, if you can persevere, I really think years 5 through 7 or 8 are probably the hardest. You've the energy, the enthusiasm, all of that has you can. How long can you do that? Maybe you can do that 5 years, but then there's just this exhaustion.
Yeah.
And it's a full exhaustion to the point where you might not even realize it till you're out of it. And that exhaustion can last a while. But if you can push through and get to year 7 or 8, I'm in year 18. Like, I got it made. This is awesome. It's like we did all the hard work, and there's still the work of ministry going on. I mean that, but I get to do such cool things now. I mean, I'm telling you about churches that we help plant. Corey, he's our latest church planting resident. He's here with me, and this is so exciting. I get to be part of. They're going to launch a church, or sort of relaunch a church. They had been a church plant. They've sort of been adopted by us for a period of time to be relaunched. It's awesome. It's exciting. I get to be part of it. So this will, in the last, besides that one we did a year ago, all the other ones we've been participating with have been since 2016. So the last 9 years, this will be the 8th church plant that we have either planned ourselves or been heavily invested in. So I got to do the fun part 8 times without being the guy who has to do all the work.
Yeah.
Like, this is awesome. I think it's like being a grandparent. I don't know yet, but all my grandparents at church are like, it's the best.
Yeah.
We did all the hard work of raising the kids. Now we get the fun part of being grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
I feel in church planning world, I'm more like a grandparent. And so I just encourage guys, maybe you're getting out in this tough season, but if you can persevere through that, at least in my experience, and some other guys I know, like Matt was just here, his was a church revitalization, Matt Capps, and he's in year 10. I think he'd say it's just getting sweeter. Now there are seasons. Just when you say that, something happens, but there's still, you can see it. Like, there's seasons where it's like, you did all that work, and now you get to enjoy more and more of the fruit of it. Mm-hmm. So if you endure there, it gets, and at least for myself and for other guys I know, it's really gotten sweet. Yeah. And you get to invest in ways that you couldn't because it demanded so much of you. So I don't know how to tell them whether or not they should. Yeah. I would probably just try to encourage them that if you do stick it out and you continue to invest there, the fruit that comes later is
worth it.
Really, really sweet. And maybe you can do more with church planting. I can do more with church planting now than I could do by planting another church.
Yeah. All right. So somebody says, we're going to plant a church. What are the ideal conditions for somebody to plant a church? I mean, if you could set up the ideal church plant, what does that look like?
Ideal church plant, I would say it's got to start with being part of a healthy church. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that, nothing else really matters. Be part of a healthy church that's
committed to it. And you're saying be
it.
part of a healthy church, not necessarily be next to a healthy local church, but being
sent by.
Being sent by.
Like, you're doing all this within the context of a healthy group of elders, a healthy church that's going to be truly supportive. But if you're talking ideal, I'm saying if you can plant somewhere within another community that's near that, again, ideal. Because we planted primarily a little further away, and what the difficulty is it's just harder to send families. We'd love to send 5 or 6 families anytime we plant. But when you plant, we planted most recently in Greenville, North Carolina, and we had lots of families pray about going, but relocating and finding a job, schools, buying houses in this climate, like saying I would lose so much money on my house, and then trying to move into one with a 5% higher interest rate. I just don't know how. And you can't say, well, have faith, do it, right? So like that just gets really harder. We're planning with Fairview locally, and even though we're not the one that's sending it, we have 5 families already committed to going and being part of it because it's in the next community over. Yeah. So again, ideal. If there's a need there in a community nearby, I think that allows more people to go. Do that. Make sure there's some plurality of leadership, that you're not doing it on your own. Whether they're fully like elder ready guys, that's great if you can. Yeah. That's, again, ideal. You have that 2 or 3 other guys that are really elder ready, that are on board with it. And though they may not have vocational pastoral desires or opportunities, they're good elders who are going to shoulder the work with you. I think those would be the main things. Is healthy church. If it can be in another community nearby that's net needed, that's great, because I think you'd have more people go with you. and then have a plurality of leaders that are going. I think.
And
those
$5
two
million.
ones. Well, if you're talking ideal, I mean, if anything over about $5,000 is probably pretty good, but 5 million certainly.
So I remember being at a church where the pastor was talking to the congregation. He was talking about church planting, and this was in the context of a business meeting. And he said, we need to be aware that we have just helped a church plant. And this means that we have just sent out 8 families. And when we do so, we don't choose the families who aren't serving. We don't choose the families who aren't giving. And so this is going to hurt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he wasn't trying to, say anything hurtful or anything. He was trying to prepare the church for a season where he felt like we were going to go through some hardship in this next season because we've got a bit of a vacuum of leadership. Yeah. And I've already counted what that, I've asked, I may not know what everybody gives, but, I want to look and see what this is going to do to our bottom line. And it's going to be some challenge. So here's a pastor who says, maybe we should be involved in church planting, but I don't want to send my people. What do you say to that pastor?
So I would go to 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, and the picture of a farmer who's sowing seed in a field. So he's got this, he's got this bag around his shoulder, and he reaches in and he grabs seed and he walks through. So if he walks the whole field and he swings his arm and he never opens his fist, what's the harvest going to look like? Like maybe a little bit that leaks out.
Yeah.
So, but he doesn't do that. Every time he swings his arm, he opens his fists. What's the harvest going to look like now?
Yeah.
God's like, in 2 Corinthians 8, God says, that's how I made my world to work.
Yeah.
You don't think that's true then in his church? Oh, God made the world to work that way with sowing and reaping, but not my church. Of course so open your hand. That's the only way you're going to bear fruit. That's the only way you're going to get a harvest is you've got to open your hand. Do you not really trust that if you are generous, that God's response will be to take care of you? What's that say about your view of who God is? So that's what I would say on a sort of challenging personal level. On the encouraging level, I'd say, here's how I would start. Find a church you can partner with that's going to shoulder it. Talk with them, get to know them, and ask them, like as you get to know them, say, hey, this is a church planting church is active in this. Is there one you're going to send out that you're pretty confident is going to succeed?
Yeah.
Can we get on board with it? And getting on board might be that we have the church planner to speak. Getting on board maybe that we give some money to the church planner to ongoing. Getting on board, maybe we send it some teams to help him. Like we do some of these things. They're a little lower commitment than sending people.
Yeah.
But what we're going to build in our people is a desire to see church planting, to get involved with it, so that when we're ready to say like, hey, maybe we should do this, it's not this, do what? What is this?
Yeah, this is foreign to us.
Yeah. So that's where I would start. And so like when we work with some churches in our area and we invited them to do that a couple years ago, we said, we've got a guy picked out. Would you start supporting him even before we send him? And he'll go to your church, he'll do, and then you'll get a win, if you will, in church planting, introduce your people. Then when you have a guy, we'll support him.
Yeah.
And we'll support him right away. We'll send people if we can. We'll send teams. We'll do anything you need. And like, we'll be fully supportive. In other words, we've got a guy ready. You do the next, join him, but then you do the next guy. And that's what Fairview did. So we're 18 years old. Fairview's 50 years old. They'd never planted a church. Because it was, and so Matt wanted them to plant a church, and they got on board with our guy, and here they are. They're now planting a church. We're supporting it. We're sending families, but I think they needed that, like church planting, not a concept out there, but like a person.
So this is a great grandchild, to a certain extent.
I don't know. That feels. I know that makes me feel old. Can we stay with the grandchildren?
That's right.
I'll stick with that for now. But I think Matt's people needed to see. Oh, this is what it looks like. This is exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, we gave some sort of money that didn't hurt us.
Yeah.
And now he's asking to give something else, money and people.
Yeah, that's great.
And we remind our people all the time that when we send people out, if it hurts only if it was good. If it didn't hurt to send them, then it wasn't good.
And we shouldn't have sent them.
Yeah. So when somebody called me this last week who's been members at our church for the last 16 or 17 years. Their boys grew up with my boys, and they said, hey, we're going to go to this church plant. And it's funny, they're sweet, they're often apologetic. They say things like, it's not about your preaching. I'm like, I didn't think it was, but now that you say that, I'm a little,
That's right. Now I'm wondering.
why'd you tell me that? No, but they're really sweet. They love
It's not
us.
about your sermon on May 12th.
Yeah, we're not angry with you. I didn't, now, are you sure? Because now you're saying it. But like, does it hurt to see them go? Well, of course it does in one part. And I just tell them this, I say the same thing. I say, hearing you tell me this, I want you to know my heart swells with pride and it's bursting into 1,000 pieces.
Yeah.
It's doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
Because you matter to us. You've been involved. You've done all of these things and you've done it for years. But what a difference you'll make to that church
Exactly.
plant.
Because you have. Yeah.
And they'll make a greater difference in that church plant than they're making right now in our church. Not because of them, but because one of them there is a much bigger thing. So yeah, it's sad, but you don't regret it when you see people thriving and churches growing.
Yeah.
And I think God, I'm not getting a prosperity gospel here. I'm just going sowing and reaping, which is God does take care of his people when they're generous. That's what he says.
Yeah.
And so he's going to take care of a church that's generous.
I've often argued that the prosperity gospel has caused two problems. First of all, it's caused people to believe the prosperity gospel.
That's a bad one.
That's a big one. But the second thing is it's caused the reactivity towards that, to think that, if that God doesn't reward faithfulness. Sometimes financially, I think Paul teaches that actually, that there's an element of that.
Yeah.
But then just in broader relationships, if it's the same thing with love. When you decide that you're going to give, you receive far more.
Absolutely.
And it's just a law of the Lord. And so it's great.
I had these conversations with our executive pastor because he's thoughtful and careful, and he'll say something, and I'll be like, yeah, let's do it. And he'll always like, well, do we have it? I'm like, yeah, it'll be fine. Let's do it. Which is good that we're both there because
exactly.
we do need to
play
make
off
sure.
each other. Yeah.
But it's funny. But we try to remind each other regularly, generosity breeds generosity. I pastor, I believe, a very generous church. And it's generous to the church. It's generous to other churches. I don't think if you turn the spigot off somewhere, I think it stops the flow everywhere. So it's like, I can't really give people here. It's like, well, you're killing generosity. Yeah. Be generous. Just be like that. God's generous. Be generous, and be generous in all the ways you can. And the more generous you are, the more you trust that, like, God, who's generous, will go like, oh, they look like he's looking more like me. This church is looking more like me, because he's generous in all the ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think generosity breeds generosity, and if you limit it in any one spot, it's going to affect all of it.
Absolutely. Well, brother, this has been a really great conversation. I've enjoyed every minute of it. Would you close us in prayer, asking the Lord to use this podcast in any way the Lord wants to use it?
I'd love to do that.
That's great.
Father, thank you for your grace, which is new every morning. Thank you that you never stop pouring your grace out on us. Thank you for just the way you've walked with us in all of these years of serving in a church. I think of so many who are wrestling with your call in their life and the direction, churches that are doing that, pastors that are doing that, seminary students. Lord, I just pray that they will, in the company of other brothers and sisters who are faithful, who are serving and living in community together, that they'll seek your guidance and they'll seek to please you with their decision making, and that you'll lead them then in the ways you want them to go. And that whether that's an established church that's healthy, which is wonderful when that happens, or a struggling church, maybe even it's dying, a church that needs to be revitalized, be replanted, or a brand new church, that they'll lead in biblical ways alongside others. They'll lead in generosity, and as a result, they'll just see a great harvest of fruit for Jesus' sake. We pray this in his name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, brother.
It's good to be here.
Good.